Somewhere in the Norwegian Sea, the water is black and the air tastes like iron. A lone destroyer cuts through 4-meter swells, running dark, no lights on deck, radar passive. The crew does not know exactly what is out there, but their senses are beginning to tell a story no one wants to hear. This is the USS Arleigh Burke, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, one of the most capable surface combatants ever built. And tonight she is alone. 14 nautical miles to the northwest, something massive has just appeared on the contact plot. The watch officer stares at the screen. He keys his radio. His voice stays flat, the way they train you, but his hands are not. What is emerging from the radar shadow of the Norwegian coastline is not a fishing vessel. It is not a research ship. It is the Admiral Nakhimov, a Kirov-class battlecruiser, 52 feet tall at the mast, 25,000 tons of displacement, armed with 20 P-700 Granite anti-ship missiles, each one capable of carrying a nuclear warhead, the largest surface combatant on Earth that is not an aircraft carrier. And right now, it has just gone active with its own radar. It knows exactly where the Burke is. In the operations center below decks, the tactical action officer starts his checklist. His name is Lieutenant Commander Travis Webb, 12 years in the Navy, 2 combat deployments. He has run this scenario in simulators dozens of times. The difference now is that the contacts on his screen are real, and they are moving directly toward him at 32 knots. The first problem is range. The Nakhimov's Granite missiles can reach out and touch a target at over 500 kilometers. The Burke's standard missiles top out at roughly a third of that. In naval warfare, being outranged is not a disadvantage, it is a death sentence. Webb calls the captain. 4 decks up, Captain Daniel Harrow has been awake for 31 hours. He reads the contact report twice. Then he picks up the satellite phone. What happens in the next 4 minutes will determine whether this vessel and the 87 sailors aboard her come home. The scenario that put the Burke in this position did not begin tonight. It began 6 months ago in a conference room in Brussels with a piece of paper that no one could agree on. A new NATO exercise directive, Exercise Northern Hammer, was supposed to be a show of resolve in the high north, demonstrating to Russia that the alliance could project power into the Arctic and defend Norway's northern coastline. Standard stuff on paper, but the details of where the exercise would happen and how close to Russian territorial waters had created a fracture inside the alliance that the Kremlin was watching very carefully. And Russia does not wait for invitations. The Nakhimov had slipped out of Severomorsk 4 days earlier, escorted by a Slava-class cruiser and 2 Udaloy-class destroyers. The Russian battle group was conducting what Moscow called a routine freedom of navigation exercise, but their track had been anything but routine. It had curved directly into the exercise corridor. Deliberately, precisely. Webb's radar picture now shows not 1 contact but 4. The Burke is facing a 3-to-1 numerical disadvantage, with a firepower gap that goes well beyond that. The Slava-class cruiser alone carries 16 additional P-1000 Vulcan missiles. Collectively, this Russian surface action group can put more than 40 anti-ship missiles in the air simultaneously. The Burke carries 32 standard missiles and 8 harpoons. She can theoretically intercept a portion of an incoming salvo, but not all of it, not even close. Webb runs the math. He does not like the answer. To the north, the lead Russian destroyer has activated its Mineral MAM targeting radar. That is not an observation platform. That is a fire control system. Webb knows what that means. He has 20 seconds to decide whether to go active with his own weapon systems before the tactical window closes entirely. He calls the captain again. This time, Harrow gives the order. What happened next is now the subject of a classified NATO after-action review. But enough has become public through congressional testimony, official statements, and the accounts of officers who were there to reconstruct the engagement with reasonable confidence. At the moment, Webb activated the Burke's AN/SPY-1D radar and went to full battle station. Something unexpected happened. The Nakhimov stopped accelerating. Not a coincidence. 40 miles to the east, in the airspace above the Norwegian Sea, 2 F-35B Lightning IIs from the Royal Norwegian Air Force had gone active on their own sensors. They had been running dark, no radar emissions, passive tracking only for the past 90 minutes. The Nakhimov had not detected them. The Russian battle group, which believed it was hunting a single isolated destroyer, suddenly realized it had been the one being observed. This is what networked warfare looks like. The Burke was never actually alone. She was the bait. The F-35Bs were not carrying bombs tonight. They were carrying the AN/ASQ-239 electronic warfare system and a full data link package. Every contact they had been tracking, the Nakhimov, the Slava cruiser, the two destroyers, their radar emissions, their weapons system signatures had been fed in real time to a P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft orbiting at altitude. And the P-8A had been feeding all of that to Commander Webb's tactical display for the last hour and a half. The Burke was not just one ship. She was the visible tip of a sensor network that stretched across 180 nautical miles of ocean. When the Nakhimov's crew understood what they were looking at, the calculus changed instantly. A lone destroyer was one thing. A coordinated NATO multi-domain kill chain was something else entirely. At exactly that moment, the Norwegian F-35Bs lit off their AN/APG-81 fire control radars in full power mode, not to launch, just to be seen, just to make sure Moscow understood the offer on the table. The Russian battle group came to a complete stop. Then it turned northeast. The engagement that did not happen matters more than the one that did. Here is what the analysts back in Washington spent the next 3 weeks pulling apart, because this kind of confrontation reveals things about capability and doctrine that a peacetime exercise never can. The Burke survived not because she outgunned the Nakhimov. She did not. She survived because the tactical picture she could see was vastly larger than the one the Nakhimov could see. The Kirov sensors are powerful, but they are oriented around a 1980s model of naval combat. Find the carrier, overwhelm it with missiles, withdraw. What that doctrine does not account for is a battlefield where even the smallest ship in the formation is a node in a network that sees everything. Modern American surface warfare is not really about ships fighting ships anymore. It is about information, specifically about which side can aggregate and act on a complete tactical picture faster than the other. The Burke's cooperative engagement capability allows it to share targeting data with every platform in a networked formation, destroyers, cruisers, aircraft, submarines, and build what operators call a composite track. One ship's radar combines with another ship's sonar, combines with an aircraft's passive sensors, combines with satellite data, and the result is a tactical picture no single platform could achieve alone. The Nakhimov is a fearsome vessel, but she was, in the end, a single node trying to fight a network. That is not a fair fight, and it was never supposed to be. Commander Webb wrote one line in his after-action report that the Navy would later circulate quietly among fleet commanders. He wrote, "We were never outnumbered. We were outranged, but we were never alone." That distinction matters enormously, because the lesson of the Norwegian Sea that night is not just about technology, it is about doctrine, about how America chooses to fight and why. For decades, critics of the surface Navy argued that large capital ships were obsolete, that missiles had made carriers and cruisers irreplaceable targets rather than instruments of power. And in isolation, that argument has merit. A single surface combatant in open water, stripped of its support network, faces extraordinary vulnerability, but the United States Navy does not operate that way. And it has not operated that way for 30 years. The network is the weapon. The ship is the platform, and the moment an adversary focuses entirely on defeating the platform, it has already missed the point. The Nakhimov's crew understood this. That is why they turned northeast. That is why the Russian Ministry of Defense 48 hours later described the interaction as a planned course adjustment conducted within the framework of the exercise. No shots fired, no casualties, no escalation, just one very large warship quietly deciding that the math no longer worked in its favor. There is a story that gets told at the Naval War College about a Soviet admiral who observed a U.S. carrier strike group exercise in the 1980s. He reportedly said that the problem with American carriers was not their power, it was that you could always see them. Big ships, big signatures, big targets. What that admiral did not yet understand, what Russia has spent the last 40 years learning the hard way, is that being seen is not the vulnerability. What you can see from the thing being seen is the variable that matters. That night in the Norwegian Sea, the Nakhimov was seen. But what the Nakhimov saw was a single destroyer on a dark ocean. That asymmetry in information, not in firepower, is what ended the confrontation before it began. The 87 sailors aboard the Burke came home, not because they outfought anyone, because they outthought them. In the weeks that followed, two things happened that rarely make headlines but matter enormously to anyone who thinks seriously about where the next confrontation in the high north will occur. First, Russia quietly accelerated the refit schedule for the Admiral Nakhimov, new electronic warfare suites, upgraded targeting systems, a redesigned combat management platform. Moscow had read the same after-action picture Webb had written, and it was investing in the answer. Second, NATO revised its northern exercise corridor and incorporated for the first time a fully integrated multi-domain kill chain exercise involving surface ships, maritime patrol aircraft, and fifth-generation fighters operating under a unified operational command. Not a show-of-force exercise, a training exercise, the kind that teaches you how to do the thing you needed to do but almost did not know how to do fast enough. Both sides, in other words, learned something. Both sides came away from an engagement that never happened with a clearer picture of what the next one might look like. That is the nature of great power competition in the modern era. It is not won in a single engagement. It is won in 1,000 iterations of preparation, adaptation, and doctrine refinement. And the side that iterates fastest, that learns fastest, that builds its network fastest, that side wins. For now, in the Norwegian Sea, the water is black again. The Burke is somewhere in it, running dark, watching, and she is not alone.